right, welcome everyone. It is 1 o'clock on Monday, April 6th, and welcome to the Northeastern IPM Varroa Mite IPM webinar series. I am Jana Hexter, and I'm in Ithaca, New York, and we have here Jennifer Lund and Kim Skirm from Maine and Massachusetts. So welcome, it's good to see you, and hope you are doing well and your families are doing well. So I'm going to go through some housekeeping before we get into the meat of the presentation. Will be a recording of this webinar available within about a week, and this is the link. You don't need to write it down because we will send you, anyone who's registered for this will get a link to the webinar that you can, in the next few days. It takes us about a week to edit it. So sometime by the end of this week, early next week, you'll get an email from me with a copy of a link to the recording. And we welcome your questions, and we tend to have people on these webinars, and it gets difficult for us to keep track of all the questions. So instead of using the chat feature, ask that you use the Q&A feature. And how you find that is you put your mouse over the screen and you'll see there's a little box that pops up either at the top or at the bottom. It's a black horizontal box. And in there, there's something that says Q&A in the middle. If you click on that, you can ask a question, and that helps Kim and Jen to monitor the questions when they're not speaking, and we can type answers to questions, or we'll use those questions during the Q&A breaks. There'll be lots of Q&A breaks, so hopefully we'll be able to get to all of your questions. If we skip over a question, it's probably because we know we're going to be covering it in the content coming up. And so we'd ask that you use that. You can also ask questions anonymously. So when you write in your question, there's a place where you can check that you want to ask it anonymously. So please use that feature if that makes you more comfortable. So we have two presenters today, and this is a great photograph. So Dr. Kim Skirm is the Chief Apiary Inspector and Apiary Program Coordinator at the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources. Dr. Skirm is a scientist by training and a hobby beekeeper. Having experience in academia, industry, and now government, Kim has always been driven by an intense love of bees to serve in roles supporting bee pollinators, informed by the latest scientific research. So welcome, Kim. There you go. And Jennifer Lund is the Maine State Apiarist and has over 20 years of entomological experience. Jen has worked on many honeybee projects, including a national colony collapse disorder study, honeybee colony health comparisons of top bar and Langstroth hives, integrated Varroa mite control effectiveness, the role of honeybees as vectors of disease, sublethal effects of colonies on full pesticide exposure, and health of migratory hives arriving in the state of Maine for blueberry pollination. Jen also has her own hives that she maintains on her farm in Maine. So welcome, Jen. And I was told that she is currently sitting in her enclosed porch looking at her hives, so for inspiration. So you can tell both of them have a lot of experience and a lot of enthusiasm for this topic. So we will dive in. And I believe we're going to start with some poll questions. So this helps us to understand who is on the call and what your level of experience is, so that we can tailor the presentation to you. And right now you should see a poll pop up on your screen, and I will be quiet for a few minutes while you answer these. There is no wrong or right answer, just take your best guess. It's not a test, it's just a few questions for us to help serve you better. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. So these are the results. So the majority of people do incorporate IPM into their hive management, so that's great. Hopefully this webinar will give you some more information to help you do that more effectively. And people assess themselves as somewhat knowledgeable, and hopefully we can move the bar on that slightly during this webinar. And most people use oxalic acid, and you can use multiple options there. All right, so with that, we are going to go into the presentation. And this is what we're going to cover today, Varroa Mite IPM and the IPM tools of when to use the tools, what to use and how to use them. And then at the end, we'll have some information about future webinars that are coming up. All right, so I believe, Jennifer, you're going in first, is that correct? All right, you need to come off mute.
Yes. Yeah, there's always so many things to press on and off when you're doing these things online. It's kind of a little bit unnerving from time to time. Anyway, I'll take the next slide.
Okay, there you go.
All right, so over the last 2 webinars, we talked a lot about mite biology and how that interacts with viruses, how they interact with viruses. Also, we learned a bit about integrated pest management. And so I just wanted to bring this slide back around to talk about kind of the principles of Varroa management, of Varroa mite integrated pest management. And so the first one is be knowledgeable, know your bee and mite pest biology. So the second one is, which we covered in the first webinar. The second is be a keeper. So monitoring your hives frequently to determine mite levels and compare with established thresholds. So we talked about that the last time. Be active, use an integrated management approach consisting of prevention as well as intervention tools, which we're going to talk a bit about today. And then the next webinar, we're going to talk about establishing an IPM plan for your apiary before the season starts. So being prepared. Next slide. And so just a quick refresher, integrated pest management is using multiple methods and strategies to control a pest or a disease. And so with when it comes to beekeeping and Varroa mite management, you want to start with good genetics. You want to monitor for mite populations. You want to use cultural controls, and then miticides when necessary. So that's the pyramid there. And next slide. And just a couple reminders to put a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about later in perspective, or in giving you some background for it. So this is about the Varroa mite life cycle. And so there's 2 phases. There's the dispersal phase and the reproductive phase. And in the dispersal phase, we find mites most often on nurse bees, because that's where they are, they're closer proximity to the brood. And so as those nurse bees are emerging, they're emerging from their cells with mites on them. And so those are the ones that you want to sample during your mite rolls. And the second phase, reproduction, the reproductive phase, this is where the mature female mites, they can reproduce up to 7 cycles in different cells. They infest cells with other mature females to increase population genetics. They avoid queen cells due to the odor and short development time. And they prefer drone cells due to the history that they have with their first host, their original host, Apis cerani, and also because they the length of the drone takes a couple more days longer than that of a worker cell, so they can actually produce more young during that time, those extra couple days. So next slide. And we find Varroa mite spread around an apiary between hives, between bees, 3 different ways. The first is drifting. So you may read in your books that, or you may read it online, that bees don't go from hive to hive. If they enter another hive that's not their own, they'll be killed. That's not true. Bees are drifting all the time. They're moving from one hive to the next, especially during times of really good foraging times. So if a bee comes back with lots of nectar and pollen, if they land at any hive's door and they show up with food, they'll be let in. So you can get mites in your hives that way. Robbing, as a hive is collapsing due to Varroa mites, bees will come from other hives, from other apiaries, try to steal the honey from those hives and pick up mites in the process. And then finally, as two bees are visiting flowers or several bees are visiting flowers, they can drop off mites to each other, spread mites between each other during that contact. So next slide. So the first question we're going to ask today is, should I manage for Varroa mites? So next slide. And I think you're probably going to guess that yes, you should manage for Varroa mites. So we have 3 years of data up here at the top for Maine, where we asked beekeepers to tell us what they did for Varroa mites in their hives. This was an anonymous survey. And those that did not treat for Varroa had, during that time period, those 3 years, around 76 to 77% losses. Those that did some sort of treatment for Varroa mites had around 40% losses. The Bee Informed Partnership does a similar survey, and they show those that are doing treatments had a 38% loss, and those that did not do treatments had a 60% loss. So yes, you should be treating. Next slide. And this was some dead out evaluations in 2019 in Massachusetts. They looked at 74 hives, and they counted the average, or they counted the number of Varroa mites. And these were the average numbers. Those yellow lines are the minimum and maximum threshold for treatment. And so you can see those dead out hives were definitely being killed by mites. So next slide, I guess forward, there's a little box that pops up. Good, and you can see the maximum here was 323 mites per 300 bees. I mean, that's over a 100% infestation rate. So that's very, that is gonna kill a hive every single time. So next slide. So yes, you absolutely should be doing something for Varroa mites. If left, a hive may only survive at most 2 years if left unmanaged, but more than likely it's going to die that first season. So next slide. So when should you manage Varroa mites? So next slide. I get asked this question all the time. When should I treat? What time of year should I treat? What date should I treat? Those sort of things. And you can see that it varies. This was some data from Massachusetts, the beekeepers there. And beekeepers are really treating different times throughout the year. And even it really depends on the time of year, what's happened that season. Do we have an early fall? Do we have a late fall? What was the forage like? How did the populations build up? And so it's really hard to make a decision because things are so variable based on a date. And so next slide. So we really don't ever recommend treating based on a calendar. Next slide. Using sampling, determining where your mites are, how high they are, and then making decisions. So for overwintered hives, you want to sample first thing in the spring, once the bees are active and the temperatures are safe to enter the hives. In packages and nukes, you want to do it at install. So you can ask your supplier who you got it from, how these were treated, when they last had a mite treatment, did they do mite rolls on some of the hives, what they had, and then you want to do those mite rolls early on at those installs. The same with a split. If you didn't check the original hive, you want to definitely check within the first month of those splits. Swarms and cutouts. Swarms are notoriously high for mite counts. There's just something about the way that those populations are growing and swarming that often we find very high levels. So as you're installing that, just scoop those bees out and put them in your alcohol roll. And then after those first kind of samples, you should be doing it at a minimum once a month. And you're going to really check it during the population buildup times are very important, and then pretty much throughout the year until you can't do them any longer. So next slide. So you want to consider treatment if you're at 1% or higher. And it really depends a lot if you can, so it's between 1% and 3% you want to consider. At 3% you have to be doing something. Below 3% you might want to consider treating even though you're not at that 3%, based on kind of what's going on in your hives. Are you at population increase? Are you on, is everything in its dispersal phase at that point? You have no brood. You're going to make different decisions based on different times of year. And so a really good guide for that information is the Honeybee Health Coalition's Tools for Varroa Management. They lay out during the different times of the growth season, or the season, the bee season, beekeeping season, what their recommended thresholds are during different times of year. So go ahead, next slide. Oh, and then we'll take some questions. It always surprises me.
Me too. All right. So we can take, we actually have lots of questions coming. If you have just come into this webinar feature rather than the chat feature or raise hands. I saw someone raise their hands. If you have a technical question around, you know, the Zoom, you could try using the chat because somebody is monitoring for that. But if it's a bee-related question, use the Q&A. All right, so I will just randomly choose one of these questions here from Giovanni. He said, last fall, I treated my hives using OAV method. There were honey supers on, but I left them on for the winter. Now that the supers are empty, is it okay to reuse them for honey this year?
Yeah.
All right. That was
right. Would you agree with that, Kim?
I love Jen's one-word answers. I love it. It's for brevity. Yeah. We realize we have 2 hours of precious airtime here. So, yeah.
Yeah. Safety is.
Yeah. And Jim Dyer asked, when do you recommend scraping bottom boards, reversing deeps, and start feeding for central Maine?
Oh, so usually I recommend it. Some beekeepers in southern Maine have already been reporting that they're doing that they've been scraping, reversing boxes. As long as your temperatures aren't getting much below freezing, well, I usually say as soon as they're not getting below freezing during the night, it's okay to do those reversals. You can start feeding liquid food inside the hive now. That would be fine. That again, I usually recommend inside the hive feeding this time of year so it doesn't get too cold. The bees won't use it if the food is cold. And then, and I usually recommend that as soon as we get to where we're not really getting freezing too cold at night, so much below freezing for internal feeding of liquid. And I would say be careful not to break up brood if you are going to reverse your things. You can always scrape bottom boards and not reverse your boxes if you want to clean out those. But don't break up your brood. That's a big thing.
Great. And we'll take one last question before we move on. Dana Barry said, can honey be harvested following the treatment of oxalic acid last fall for human consumption? Is it different for use, for self-use or for sale to others?
So this is a good question because we get this, I think this is a common misconception. So if you use oxalic acid on a hive that you left honey supers on, or you've got frames that you like to harvest that have honey in them, technically per the label, it cannot be harvested for human consumption. However, I do think that USDA folks are working on loosening that a bit or changing those recommendations because of what limited mite tools are available. But currently the label is the law. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but you cannot use that honey for human consumption. You could use it to feed the bees though. You could feed it back to them.
Great. Lovely. Well, okay, let's move on to the next question.
Great. And so this is the third important question. What should I use to manage Varroa mites? There's a lot of options out there, and I like to think about Varroa management as a true two-prong approach. So there's prevention, where you're using methods that are going to try to keep the numbers of mites in your hive lower for longer, and then intervention, when you actually have to hit those, if you have to knock down those mites. So two-prong approach, prevention and intervention. So these are some numbers from the Bee Informed Partnership. They ask, again, an anonymous survey from beekeepers. And so these are the ones from New England-ish states, because I think we include New York. Yeah, we include New York, even though they're not technically New England. And so drone brood removal, we don't really see much difference between the two, maybe a little bit. fewer losses with those that are removing drone brood, but again, it's not statistically significant. And then the same with screen bottom boards. And so these methods are not going to give you those quick kills like a miticide would, but they can help keep these numbers lower longer. Next slide. And so with intervention, these are going to be your traditional miticides, things like Mitaway quick strips or oxalic acid, Hopguard, Apivar, those sort of things. And those we do see, they're for a really good quick knockdown. Those that are using them, this is again the Be Informed partnership, is their losses, people who are using these products are 37% versus 55% those that are not using it. And then down in the bottom, that's the number of different Varroa products that people are using. So those that have the lowest losses are down in, they're using multiple options, multiple products, multiple techniques to get at their Varroa mite problem. They're not just doing the same thing over and over, and they're getting the best control. So next slide. There we go. And so in Maine, we find that there's a lot of, there's people that are using both prevention and intervention, and those that are using both techniques tend to have the lowest losses. Those numbers there that are presented are not the loss numbers. Those are actually the percentage of people who are doing those, who are using those methods. It's not loss numbers, because I would love to see a 5.9% loss number, but we just don't see that nowadays. So these are so there are people who are using everything, or different strategies for getting at this. Next slide. And so what you use is going to depend a lot on a bunch of different factors, and that includes checking the outside temperature. So there are some things that we can do if it's cold out, or there are things that we should not be doing if it's excessively hot out. Determining your brood presence or absence. So there are things that we would do late in the season when there's no brood present versus when there's a lot of brood present. What the population size in the hive is, what's happening with the population size. Is it increasing, decreasing, or dormant? Some of these things work best when populations are decreasing or whether they're dormant. And then whether you have honey supers on or not. And I know Kim is probably going to talk about that quite a bit, because that's always the biggest question is, can I use this with honey on? And so selecting the best tools, not one, so that's multiple tools, both between prevention and intervention. If we're talking about prevention, a lot of those you don't need any, you might need a little bit of specialty gear, but with intervention, with your miticides, you are definitely going to want to talk about or consider personal protection equipment, as well as mode of action with those. The next slide. And so some of the prevention methods are drone brood trapping, drone brood removal, screen bottom boards, brood interruption, disruption or splits, and then requeening or caging a queen, and also I like to always put into there genetics, good genetics with your bees as well. While intervention tend to be our miticides, and those are applied as needed. Most of our prevention methods you could use during the bee season. Some are better during certain times, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But typically our intervention is when you need them, so they're not kind of a regular thing. Next slide. So again, with the drone brood removal, brood break, those are things that you can do year round. I just love these diagrams. So these are, all of these pictures, these drawings are out of the UMass Extension. Hannah there just did an amazing job with all of these. They make my heart so happy. I don't know why, they're just so great. Anyway, next slide. I love looking at them.
So thank you to Hannah, by the way. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Hannah, very much for letting us borrow these for the presentation, because they're phenomenal. So with drone brood removal, I want you to remember that mites are 8 to 10 times more likely to invade drone cells than worker cells. So we can use that to their advantage. We can put in specialty frames. Those green frames are a good example. Or you can put in comb, wax foundation that's specifically sized for drones. Or you can put in medium frames or shallow frames into a deep box, and the bees will draw down that remaining space into drone comb typically. And so what you would do is put these different things in, leave it for 14 to 21 days, and then remove it once it's capped or nearly capped, and then dispose of it. So you can put it in the freezer and kill both the drones and the mites, or you can scrape it all down into a bucket and throw that out. One thing I do with mine is I take my green frames out and actually feed them to my chickens, so at least the protein goes someplace else. My chickens have recognized the green frames. Anytime I take one out of a hive, they come from everywhere in the yard and flock to me. And so you can, we find that as many mites emerge from 50 to 60 drones as 1,000 worker cells. So just removing some of your drone cells can really be an effective way to keep those numbers of mites lower longer, and can be an effective tool as part of a larger IPM strategy. And this is really, it works well during portions of the year at population increase and population peak. Not so much at population decrease, because the bees aren't really interested in making drones at that point. They're done for the season, and so they're not gonna, they usually will ignore those frames. Next slide. And so there's a good example of the green frame with the drone size cells, and then it capped. And then once you kill all of those drones, you can scrape them off and then put those frames back in, install them back in. Great, next slide. Oh, go
just
ahead.
A quick plug for Hannah. So the UMass extension, Hannah Whitehead, if you Google that, sorry, the URL is long. I think I've got it on one of the slides, but she's going to be releasing soon these drawings and these guidelines on the website. So Jen and I really like them a lot.
I just love them. I'm in love with them.
Jen's going to marry them. So
I'm going to marry all of those diagrams. I just love them.
Yeah.
And yeah, thank you. And so then brood breaking, that's another way that if you're disrupting the bee's brood life cycle or the brood cycle in the hive, you're also going to be disrupting the mite life cycle. So a lot of this already happens in hives. Beekeepers split hives to manage swarming. So what you can do is when you do those splits, you can cage a queen for 1 to 2 weeks to disrupt that egg laying. This is a little bit, actually I forgot to mention with the drone brood removal, two things to mention about that is that there are a couple negatives to it. So if you forget to take them out before they emerge, you've caused a really big problem in your hive. So that's one of the negatives of it. The other one is that it does take resources to produce those drones. You know, they feed them, and drones are really, really needy when it comes to food. They eat a lot, and to make that wax capping, so it does reduce the resources available in your hive. So those are two things to mention on that one. So now back to breaking the brood cycle. So with this one, it's really important to be able to find and handle your queen so that you can cage her. You may need a little extra equipment, so an extra hive to do the split and some queen cages. And you want to make sure that you time your splits with your floral resource availability, because splits will need a lot of food right off the bat. You want to make sure that you're during a time period where there's a lot of available food out there, or you're feeding. And that could differ depending on where you live and the weather for that year. Some years, I suspect this might be one for Maine, we might have an early swarm season. And then you may need to pick up queens depending on what time of year it is. If you do some splitting or some queen caging later in the season, you may need to buy some queens as opposed to making your own. And then later on in the season, if one of your splits doesn't quite take off or it's a little bit weaker, you can always combine that back together. There's no real loss in that. You can also combine brood cycle disruption with a miticide treatment. So if you break up your hives in a way where you put your brood all in one hive and you put a queen with adult bees in the other, you can actually treat those splits differently. So the one that has the queen and only adult bees and no brood, that one might be a good option for something like, which we'll talk about later, like oxalic acid, where it works really well for on the dispersal phase. So you will have no mites in cells at that point, so that's a good cleanup treatment for that. And then in the other one, if you cage your queen, put her in cage for 2 weeks, allow that brood to hatch out, then you're in the same situation that you were with that first hive, where you can then do one of those cleanup treatments after that split when you have no brood left. I hope that made sense. So next slide. So before we get into pesticides or miticides, I want to kind of talk a little bit about when we talk about chemical tools, we're really talking about pesticides. These are substances that are intended to be used for preventing, destroying, repelling, or mitigating pests. And there's lots of different categories, and we're going to be talking about miticides. And those are ones that kill mites, which of course Varroa mite is a mite. And so pesticides are registered by the EPA, they're tested, they're trialed, and then they're further registered locally by different states before they can be legally sold in those states. So there's going to be one that we're talking about that's a newer one. I think, Kim, you're going to talk about Hopguard 3?
Yeah, yeah.
So that right now is registered in Massachusetts, and they can use it. You can use it there, but it's not registered currently in Maine, so you cannot use it for us. So there are differences between states. I suspect they just haven't gotten the paperwork done yet for Maine. It's going to probably be registered there, but just just understand that some of these between states, these regulations can be a little bit different. So next slide. And then I'm passing it off. So
thank you. All right. What a tough act to follow. All right. So let's talk about miticides. I know this is a hot topic. We've already got a lot of questions in the chat area here. So I know we're going to have a lot of conversation time. Okay. So applying miticides to our hives. Let's dig in. Go to the next slide. So first thing I just want to clear up, this is a real common misconception, and I think some of the suppliers also have this listed on their websites. They may sell miticide products or products that you can purchase to use for mite treatments as medications. They are not medications. These products are pesticides. So you're not applying medications to your hive if you're using miticides. You are indeed a pesticide applicator. So I know some folks might be hearing that for the first time, and I just want to give you a couple seconds here to digest that. But because you are a pesticide applicator, you are responsible for using these products in a safe manner. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that you need to use them. And then of course, we're going to go into great detail of the products that are available and how to read labels so you can understand how to apply them. So if we'll go to the next slide, we'll dig in here a little bit. So if you're applying miticides to other people's hives, before we get into the specifics, you may also need a pesticide applicator's license. Most likely you will need a pesticide applicator's license, depending on the state you're in. So if you own the hives, if they're your bees, and you put a miticide product into them, you most likely do not need a pesticide applicator's license. If you are applying them in a neighbor's bees, or if you're doing this as a service and getting paid for it, you may need a special license that allow you to do that. So regardless, it's always best to check with your state. So we're going to give you a way to do that. If we go to the next slide, we'll show you the best source to reach out. This NPIC website, the National Pesticide Information Center, has a great website, and you'll notice on here, they actually give you sort of a list of good questions to think about for exploring this website. And one of them is, do you need to have a pesticide license and how you get that? So if you click on your state, you can be directed really quickly from this main website at NPIC to learn more about your regulations, to figure out if you need a license and what it looks like if you do, what requirements are necessary. So if we go to the next slide, I'll show you an example. We talked a lot about the Honeybee Health Coalition. Jen and I cannot sing the praises enough for this group. It's a really fantastic resource. So even if you've watched all these webinars, we highly recommend you go and check out their website, download the guide. I think it's how many pages? The latest one they just did. I think it's up to, look, here we go, right here. It's the 7th edition. Wow, awesome. And it is 29 pages, but you've got plenty of time if you're hanging out at home to read this. It's a really nice read. It's also just a good thing to have as a reference. So we recommend you go and do that. We also use this Tools for Varroa Mite Sampling guide to make a very condensed version. If you go to the next slide that we have available, and I'll show you how to get there. So this next slide, we're going to go through a series of these. We've got this brochure that we made for Varroa Mite IPM, really condensed version of the Honeybee Health. Oop, you can't see it. We're in a third dimension. But the Honeybee Health Coalition, we basically digested this information. The back of this is going to give you the steps to doing an alcohol wash. And if you go to the next slide, if you open up this brochure, if you get a hard copy or if you download it off the web, I'll show you where to do that next, but you'll see it's a really brief compilation of all the things in the Honeybee Health Guide. So it's kind of a cheat sheet or Cliff Notes version, if you will, of things to use really quick to figure out what mite products you might want to be using, what tools you might want to incorporate in, and it includes the chemical options are above, and then below that are the non-chemical. So basically the top of this brochure would be those intervention that Jen mentioned. So those are the options to use once you have established a set of prevention tools that are the bottom of this this half page, this screen bottom. So if we go to the next slide, we'll show you if you have a hard copy of these, or if you'd like a hard copy, I'm sure we'd be happy to mail you one, or you can print one very easily off of the Northeast IPM's website. They did a great job of downloading or putting up both the version you can download, and then if you go to the next slide, they did a step further, which was really cool. They took the chart and put it online for you as well, so you could digest it easily if that's something that you want to just quickly reference or bookmark on your computer. So these are good things to have. Of course, I always recommend going back and having a copy of the Honeybee Health Coalition's guide. It's a fantastic resource. This is the Bible, so to speak, and we've just taken it and digested it here a little bit for folks who want to have a quicker version. So if you go to the next slide, just kind of we're going to use that and reference that a lot, but overall, when we talk about mite treatments today, for the intervention part of this, so those chemical methods, basically they fit into two big groups. You've got synthetic chemicals, so those are the things that are manufactured. Currently, only one of the 3 of those availably registered synthetic products have not been shown to be resistant. So the X's on the 2, the Apistan and the Checkmite Plus, means that even though these are registered products and you can use them, and you can purchase them, they have been shown to have resistance. So that means that the mites are able to build up a tolerance, and even if you use them, you may not achieve adequate mite control. So they are registered again, and you can purchase them, but just be wary that resistance has been shown. So in that synthetic group, you can see the Apivar is one of the real commonly used synthetic products, and we're going to go into great detail about all these, so we won't do it just yet. But the next group on the bottom, the bigger group of natural chemicals, those are things that are sort of more suited to what I think a lot of people seem to feel a little bit more comfortable with if they don't want to use something like a hard chemistry like the synthetic group. But these are products that are in essence contain some version of a natural, whether it's an organic acid or it's an essential oil, something they're getting out of their landscape to be able to modify these to create them. So that would be something like Mitoid Quick Strips or Formic Pro, which has formic acid, Hop Guard, which we're going to talk about. All these we're actually going to talk about, that has the hop beta acids and then oxalic acid. In Massachusetts, we have registered oxalic acid as a product called Apabioxyl, and it's a little bit different version, but if I just want to give folks that information if you're looking for that. And then of course the essential oils, these would be the products that have thymol in them as the main the product substance, so the active ingredient. But that would be Hop Guard and Apalifar, so both of those. So this kind of gives you just a real quick breakdown of where we're going to go as a roadmap. And then if you're taking notes, these are things to note as what you're sort of thinking about right now. I don't think you need to categorize yourself as someone, I don't use chemicals, I never want to use chemicals, so I'm not going to use Apivar. I think you should think more broadly of, do I have a pest issue? Are my Varroa mites above a certain threshold? And then what are the tools available to me? And how do I create this really nice comprehensive plan that we're going to help you in next webinar take all of this information, digest it, and make it more specific to your apiary. So let's move through here. And if you're taking notes in this, write down a couple of key things that you like about these as we go into greater detail. If you want to find out of those products, or if there are other products, versions of those that are registered in your state, most of the states you can see, you can go through Kelly registration systems. If you Google Kelly registration systems, you'll come up to this map. And if you click on it, the ones that are a little darkened here are in their registry. So unfortunately, the folks that are not in the darker kind of gray color, like Montana or Wyoming, you guys aren't in Kelly, but you may be in the next system that I'll show you. But you can see for the Northeast, the majority of us, with the exception of Maine, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island, are mostly in that Kelly registration system. So you can click on that. For instance, I did this for Massachusetts. So if we go to the next slide, I'll show you what happens. So if you go into that system, it will bring you specifically, if you look here for Massachusetts, you can search by product. So if you're saying, okay, Kim, you're telling me all these things that are available to me. How do I know which one to pick, or how do I know what I have available? Or what can I use in my state? These are the best way to find out what's registered, so to speak, in the sense that this is a state registered product, and those are the things that you can purchase to be able to use in your apiary. So pesticide products, as Jen mentioned earlier, are registered on the national level, and then they're registered on the state level. So you have to go through 2 tiers of registration to be available for use. So if you have a beekeeper, or if you've got an out yard, for instance, in Massachusetts, and you have one in Maine, we may not have the same products registered in each of our states. So you have to be mindful of what you have and what you can purchase. But if you see, the one here for Massachusetts is fairly easy to navigate, because I usually go into, you can see what's highlighted here, search by pest. I click in or type in Varroa Mite, and it quickly brings me up all the products that are registered. At this point in the platform, I can click on these. So for instance, if you go to the next slide, you can see if you click on one of the products, actually I think I went to Jen's version, but if you click on, for instance, Apivar, we'll show you later on, it'll immediately take you to a screen where you can see the label for the product. And we're going to show you today more in depth how to read labels, how to understand how to use these products, and very importantly, how to get the materials that you need to apply them safely and properly. So for those who aren't in Kelly, you may be in an alternate system, the National Pesticide Information, or NPERS, is that how you pronounce this, Jen, in Maine? Is it NPERS? Yeah. So this system seems to be the other really common one. So for instance, if you're in Maine, this is the system you would use. You would not be able to search by pest like you did in the Massachusetts version in Kelly, but you could search by product name. So for instance, I think I typed in here Apivar, so you could type in, now that you know the names of some of these that you'll see on the labels or that you can purchase, you can type that in. You can also go to the active ingredient. So typically these are 2 areas that I find most beekeepers will know one or the other, or some version of one they can search for. Now you're doing all of this because what you want to get, if you purchase a pesticide product, it should come with a label. However, at this point, you haven't purchased anything. So what we're doing is giving you the tools so you can decide what you would like to purchase to make this toolkit for your apiary to manage your hives. So you can go through and search for these products to see their label and read when they can be applied. Of course, we're going to give you a lot more of those tips today, but just to kind of give you the background of where this is all coming from. And a good practice for you as a pesticide applicator in your normal life and the other ways not related to bees, this is how you can find information related to pesticides in your state. So let's keep going here, and we'll go through the list of, here we go. So this is a good version for the folks in Maine. If you clicked on Apivar, you can see you go into the page and you can actually go to the label. So you could click on, it's a little hard to understand what you click at this point, but if you go to the product name, if you click Apivar on this screen where it's circled, you can quickly go to where the label is located. So let's go through on the next screen, and we'll show you sort of a little bit more how to navigate this. Before we get into it, though, let's break, because we're going to start talking specifically about these products, and we want to have some time to answer questions. It looks like we have a lot of questions. So,
okay, so I'll ask a couple of questions that you flagged. So Debbie Neitz said, why not treat once a month without testing?
So I always say test before you treat. Sorry, there's a couple different reasons why. Number one is that some of the mite treatments are a little bit hard on bees. So if you're using some of the products, you could kill your queen or you could kill brood with them. So you want to use those only when you need to. The other reason is we like to kind of make decisions based on numbers. So we talked a little bit about this with monitoring last webinar, where that kind of, it's really hard to just, if you just treat, to know whether those treatments are doing anything. So sometimes we do stuff in our hives and it doesn't actually work, or it was a failed treatment. And so monitoring, following a treatment, you can catch that. If you're just treating willy-nilly, you don't really know what's going on in the hive. The other thing is that treating over and over with the same product, you're more likely to develop resistance in your mite populations. And so we try to discourage that. So overuse can, harm your hive. It can also lead to resistance issues. And so those are the two big ones. And then the third one is monitoring helps you understand what's going on in mite populations in your hive. So, yep.
Okay. And we'll take one more question from Anne Volga. She said, treat at 1%. I thought it was less than 10 mites and half a cup of bees. And then I heard in your seminar 5 mites. Now I just heard 1 mite. I'm confused.
I was going to say.
You want that, Kim?
Jim's like, I didn't make that slide. Answer that question, Kim. Okay, so, what I always try to do for beekeepers is I want you to shoot for the best. So if you can get the lowest mite level possible, it'll always lead to healthier bees. So the goal, the thresholds that set up with the Honeybee Health Coalition Varroa Mite Management Guide list 3% to, 1% to 3%. 1% being that lowest threshold possible, 3% being that, oh, you better treat or you're going to lose bees. So, I try to always give folks to shoot for the 1%. If you can't get in there, that's why we put that little disclaimer on that slide. A lot of people say, I can't get to 1%, Kim. What am I going to do? Well, try really hard. If you can't do it, it's hard. It depends on a lot of things if you can get there, but try to get to 2%. But if you're at the 3%, you definitely want to consider some options. Especially if you're doing other things that aren't intervention related, so chemical related, then you want to start putting those in pretty quickly. Because if you let it get above 3%, you're going to lose your hive. There's just no way around it. It's going to happen. So shoot for 1%. That's what I try to tell people. So I know that's a little confusing, but we definitely want to get you as low as possible. So, yeah.
Great. Okay, so let's move on with the next section, and then we'll answer some more questions after that.
All right. So this is, I think, the biggest area that we see people struggle the most is figuring out, when to apply the products and then how to apply the products. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. We'll go to the next slide. I'm going to give you some first thing to keep in mind, tips before we even get in kind of the nitty gritty of these products, is that you're going to need personal protective equipment, or PPE. The good thing is that you need this, but you also can get it fairly easily from either the supplier that you purchased your products from, so a bee supplier, or if you're purchasing it, from someone local, they may also have the stuff available. Now, the equipment that you're going to need is going to be stuff that obviously protects you and your body during these applications, because remember, you are a pesticide applicator, so you're applying a pesticide. So, you got to do your due diligence to make sure yourself is safe and also the environment. So you're going to need to read those labels, and we just told you how to find the product information for your states, how to find the labels. Now we're going to actually teach you now how to read labels and figure out what this stuff means. So we'll go to the next slide. We'll kind of dig in a little bit on this topic. I chose the label for oxalic acid. If you've never seen this label, or you've never seen any pesticide label with your miticides, I would recommend very quickly for you to contact your state apiarist and also that supplier, because it is against the law for suppliers to sell pesticides that do not have an accompanying label. So they need to be giving you some information with these products. This label for oxalic acid, first off, I just want to address it. It is what a lot of folks like to call a skull and crossbone. So this is the highest level of danger for products. So that means, not because it is the highest level should you pay attention, but in general, you should be more cautious when applying pesticides. But if you're going to use this product, this is definitely one that needs an additional amount of personal protective equipment. So we're going to use it as an example of how to find the information on personal protective equipment and in general how to read a label. And then we'll get a chance in a few of the other slides, opportunity for you to see how this information keeps coming up again and again on these labels, so you can quickly figure out how to navigate a label. So obviously at the top of this label, we'll start at the very top. You can see the name oxalic acid dihydrate. You can see the active ingredient. You'll notice that in addition to the oxalic acid, we also have inert ingredients. So those are trade secrets. Those are not things that are available to know what they are, but they basically are thick products or materials that help the product become sticky or adhere or apply easily. But there you can see what it's made of. So you should see that information. You should also see on this label, we obviously have in that square box that says accepted. It's got a date on it, and at the very bottom of that is a 91266-1. That's the EPA registration number. You can also find that on the bottom right-hand corner of the label. So any product that you're using as a pesticide should have a registered EPA number. So that means that the product's obviously been registered, but that it's also been processed in the sense that the label that you're reading is the correct label. Sometimes you see labels where the registration number is left blank. So you want to always make sure you have the registration number. And that way you'll know you're reading a legit label that's been approved and published by the EPA for the product. The additional thing, so obviously you want to look for directions of use, right? That's the first big thing. But before we get into that, you always want to go to on labels this area called personal protective equipment. Sometimes it may be labeled personal protective equipment, or it could be labeled just PPE. But usually you'll see that almost exact jargon on every label. Underneath here, this label is great for this because it gives you really specifically what you need to apply this product safely. So you'll see on long sleeve shirt, on pants, socks and shoes. Boy, I hope people are applying pesticides with clothes on. So if you're doing working bees and you don't have any clothes on, now's the time you got to put clothes on. So those are two biggies. The next thing is the bigger piece of keeping you where your skin is obviously not in contact with these chemicals. So there's usually some language about gloves. So this particular language on this label is really specific, which is great about what gloves you need to purchase. Then there's information about eyewear. So they list like goggles, and we'll show you some examples. And then of course, this particular product needs a respirator. So this is a little bit more involved than a lot of the other mite products regarding the respirator necessity. But because of that, you really do need to pay attention when you buy these products, especially this one, right? That you're going to need to make sure equipment that isn't just what you already have as part of your bee work kit. The other thing to look at on these labels, especially if you're managing apiaries that are large in size, or if you're managing a community apiary where there are multiple beekeepers visiting the same hives, is they may have language called a restricted entry interval, or you may see it listed as REI. That basically tells you, and typically it's 24 hours or 48 hours or 72 hours. That means that you should not enter the space that has been treated with pesticides in that amount of time. So if the REI was 24 hours, that means you put it on 24 hours later, you don't go back into the bees until after 24 hours. So that gives you a chance to obviously maintain safety for yourself, but if you're managing apiaries that are shared, you want to make sure that you communicate that. So if you put on a mite product, and someone that's managing the bees didn't know that happened, they could go into the hive and be, unfortunately, in contact with those products without safety. So something to look for. Directions of use, we're going to go through quite a bit, but you can see, you always want to see this language on the label. So that was a very quick label 101, but hopefully it gives you an idea of what you need to look for. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll show you a little bit more information about personal protective equipment, or PPE. So we talked about the label. One thing that you'll hear a lot with folks that apply pesticides as a business or just in general in the industry is that this language called the label is the law. So I put this in here because, again, you are a pesticide applicator if you're using these miticides. So you also need to follow these guidelines. The label is the law. You should have these labels. You should be reading them. You should have read them before you do an application. And you should read them again before you do another one because it's very important for you to understand what's required. So the clothing piece we talked a little bit about, these are basic things. I do see a lot of beekeepers, especially depending on what climate you live in, might be a little lackadaisical on some of the clothing pieces, but really, don't go out in your bathing suit and apply miticides. It's not going to be fun for you. It's not safe for you. And I'm sure the bees are going to be judging you. So just don't do it. So the next thing is for gloves. This is, actually I brought them in. I'm missing in my office. I usually have all my little visuals. So these are my visuals. These are nitrile gloves. Most of you are like, oh my gosh, that's gold. The thing that a lot of people are coveting these in toilet paper right now. But these are not the level of personal protective equipment. So your beekeeping gloves that you have that are leather, if you're wearing those, are not personal protective equipment. These nitrile gloves are not personal protective equipment. Most of the gloves that you list have to be really specific. And if you have questions, or if you purchase some gloves, if you visit your local extension office, or if you contact your state pesticide enforcement division, you can probably bring them your materials and they will go through and say, oh yeah, these will work, or oh no, that's not actually what this means. For instance, for oxalic acid, the personal protective equipment, the gloves that are listed need to be 14 mils thick. So these aren't even close to that. I mean, these are just the ones you can purchase at, home improvement store or whatever, home store. So be real careful. If you put these over your leather gloves, that does not mean they're 14 mils thick. So don't layer gloves. So just some basic stuff that I see beekeepers do. Protective eyewear, this can be a little tricky, especially if you're wearing a veil, obviously, right? Because it might be a little harder to see, but you need to plan putting on your bee suit, right? If you're going to use miticides in your hive, that you have a chance to put on these different pieces. What you don't want to do is put on your bee suit or your jacket or your veil and then start working with miticides and then realize you didn't put your goggles on and you've already touched the mite product. So just be real careful, right? When you're thinking about this, set everything out and all the materials you're going to need. So that way it's all a flow system in the apiary. And then the respirators, this is pretty specific. So right now we're obviously in a shortage worldwide to get respirators and maybe even gloves. So these may not be things that you can find easily. If that's the case, we're happy to work with you offline or try to do the best we can to get you some resources that will help you try to find this and apply these products safely. We can check with the EPA. I'm not sure, I haven't heard anything yet. Jen, have you heard anything about EPA recommendations if you can't find respirators right now to apply miticides? We can definitely ask in our groups. So that's a good question. But yeah, so we hear you and I totally understand your concern if you're not able to find a respirator. So let's go through, we'll keep going here. So if you look at the labels of these products and you look at what chemical safety tools are needed, so your personal protective equipment, again, I really love how Hannah has broke this down at UMass. You can see for the different miticides. So the things that you need at the minimum of gloves will be those products at the top, those synthetic, the things that you need gloves and protective eyewear, HopGuard 3 and ApiGuard. So those are the more natural products. And then you need gloves, eyewear, and a respirator. Actually, oxalic acid we talked about, in addition to Apilifar, which may be surprising to some folks, and Mitoid Quick Strips and Formic Pro. So those two products also need respirators in addition to those other two pieces of PPE. So if you've been using these products and you have not been using a respirator, obviously this is a misapplication in the sense that you're not applying them according to the label. Label is the law. Also, you are putting yourself and maybe others in danger. So just be really careful. All right. So I'll give you an example. This is a beekeeper photo that we used in class actually to show people how to do oxalic acid. But it was really when we started looking at it, you can notice that the gloves that this beekeeper is wearing are not, unfortunately, the right personal protective equipment because they're just standard leather beekeeping gloves. And those are, regardless of any chemical, the gloves that are listed, leather gloves are porous and they are not at all personal protective equipment. So I just put this up here in case this is you, or if you've done this before, not to shame you, but just to kind of let you know and be mindful that you may need some additional personal protective equipment applying these products. All right, we'll go to the next slide. So how do you get this stuff? Right now, it might be a little hard. I think the best thing we can offer, if you reach out to the people that you purchase your bee treatments from, your mite treatments from, they may have that. I know some of the beekeeping supply companies have, actual, like you can purchase respirators from them that have been deemed appropriate for the products. I don't know if they may not have a good supply right now. It's tough. This is a hard topic. And obviously with the current situation we're in, it might be even harder to find some of these things. We as state representatives and government are not allowed to endorse or recommend any particular vendors for products, but I can definitely tell you that if you reach out to the people you purchase your bees or your mite treatments from, they're probably the best source for you. So, all right, we'll keep going here. Oh, there we go. We did that one. So a couple things to note about respirators. We have a really fantastic extension agent here who works with our pesticide education program at UMass Amherst in Massachusetts, Natalia Clifton. She also has done a great job of tailoring courses like this respirator trainer fit course for people who need respirators, specifically designed in this case for beekeepers, included in with farmers. And it was really a great way for her to reach out because she realized that real quickly people need help with this. So if you're interested, this may be something that's offered in the future. So then there could be something similar to this offered in your area. So because respirators can be a little tricky, especially when it comes to figuring out the right one to purchase. So yeah. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so let's talk about chemical tools. This is what everybody's probably been waiting on, and Jen has been avoiding. So, all right, if you go through, or maybe you've even pulled this up as you're watching this webinar, the version that we created, this chart. So we're going to go through them in this chart order, starting with the synthetic chemicals. We're going to start with the APVAR product. We're going to, each one of these slides, the way it's going to work is I'm going to show you the label for the product, show you where to find the information, and then I'm going to take the information from the label and put it on the slide. So as representatives of state government, we cannot apply pesticide products, and we also cannot, in essence, like physically show you how to put a product on. So what I'm going to show you is how to read a label and how to take that information off the label and use it as a beekeeper to apply a product. So we'll kind of start with this one. So let's go with APVAR. We'll start with this product in the next slide. So this label is a little messy right now. They actually just updated the label for APVAR. So if you go through either Kelly registration or MPeers and find your label or whatever resource you're using in your state, you may see this kind of a little bit edited version. One thing you'll notice with the label for APVAR is right off the bat, right? The first part of this label, they've got this first aid section. And that's always a good thing to make sure you know also is where it's located on the label in case something happens and you apply these products and need to get some emergency assistance. Yeah, again, we have when we do this workshop in person, Natalia does a great job of going through the different safety pieces. But if we go to the next slide, we'll take you through the part of this label that you would want to pay attention to. So APVAR is kind of an interesting product. It can be used in hives and also in nukes. So it's got a couple different forms and depends on your state and what's regular or registered and what is available from the beekeeping suppliers of what version of the product you purchase. But the nice thing about this label, really quick under the directions for use, you can kind of sort of scroll in if you're on the web, is that you'll see it says for Varroa treatment, you remove the honey supers before application and you use 2 APVAR strips per brood chamber. 1 strip per 5 frames of bees. So this label does a great introduction for us to this term called frames of bees, or FOB. You may see that language in some of the other product labels. It's a nice way for the manufacturers to quickly give you some information if you're using a different type of hive, which we'll talk about at the end of the presentation, some tips. And also if you're using, something that may not be the standard link straw 10-frame hive, how do you navigate this? So if you'll notice on this particular product label, it says 1 strip per 5 frames of brood or bees, so FOB, or 2 strips per brood chamber. So obviously they've got a little chart. You'll see at the very top of this page, it says number or hashtag FOB or hashtag strips, and then you'll see kind of a range there. So obviously if you've got 5 or less, you would use 1 strip, and that's a way for you to go through and judge how much of this product you need. So if we go to the next slide, and of course if you go down through that label, you'll see a lot more specific details. And again, this label's fairly short. I think this one is 5 pages. And again, it's got all the extra edits on it, so it might be even smaller than that. These are not really long things to read. So it does you a good service, again, to have copies of this if you don't get them with the product. And if you don't get them with the product, let the folks know at your government level, because that's not appropriate for them to be giving you chemicals by label. So APVAR is an amitraz product. That's the active ingredient, or you may see the acronym AI. So it has a 3.33% amitraz, which may not seem like a lot of active to you because the rest of that product is made of those inert ingredients, but it does a really good job of contact kill. So this product needs to come in contact with the bees, therefore the mites on the bees, to be able to offer a kill. When you put this product into the hive, you want to be able to make sure, again, that you're targeting them in the brood chamber where they will come in contact with the most amount of bees / obviously the most amount of mites on those bees and or on that associated brood. The label instructions say that you want to use this no more than 2 times per year, and you want to wait at least 2 weeks after the treatment of this product, which can be 6 to 8 weeks, depending on, again, what formulation you use and what size hive you have. So 42 to 56 days. So 2 weeks after that, before you add honey supers, if you're going to use this product during a time when you would have honey flow. So the other thing to note when you read these product labels is a temperature. So Jen mentioned earlier, there's a couple of things when you're choosing a pesticide, a couple of the factors, brood population, temperature is a big one in that. And so you'll notice at the tops of these slides, you'll see the trees. Again, these are accredited for UMass Amherst. Thank you, Hannah. These are fantastic. So the population increases when you want to use this product. So that would be like spring, going into summer, maybe even a little bit into fall. Depends on your area. For the Northeast, that's kind of where we are, and then the population decrease. So this is a good product to use fairly for us in the Northeast throughout the year, because it doesn't have a temperature dependence. Doesn't matter what the outside temperature is. It's fairly good to use when you have brood. Obviously, your population is increasing or decreasing. The only hiccup right to this product is that you cannot use it when you have honey supers on. So you would need to wait 2 weeks after the product has the treatment period of the 56 days before you can apply honey supers. So if you use this product with honey supers, you cannot harvest the honey for human consumption. You should not be eating the honey. And really, frankly, you should not be using it with honey supers. But if you make an mistake, just don't feed it to humans. You could use it back on the bees again, but do not feed it to humans. So that's sort of the caveat there. And you'll see that a lot with these products. So let's go to the next one. We're going down through our chart. We're going to get out of the synthetic chemicals, and we're going to talk about Apiguard. So Apiguard and Apilifar are two thymol-based products from the thyme plant, if folks are familiar with that. Those two products do have the same active ingredient of thymol. So the Apiguard label, if you take a look at that one, a little bit longer label, but again, similar where you've got the danger area for first aid at the front. If we scroll to the next slide, if you scroll through this label on the next page, you'll see general information. So there's a lot of tips here, tells you when not to use it, and then of course it goes into the procedures of how to use this product, which we will summarize on the next slide so you can see. Again, these summaries do not take place of reading the label, and this product has a couple of different formulations for use. So you've got stuff that is going to come in a tub, you've got stuff that's in an aluminum tray that has a little pullback tab on it, that most of you may be using and available for purchase, and you've got actually sachets that you can use. So there's a couple different ways that this product is used. So you need to be specific about what formulation you purchased. So the one next slide is going to show you the most common that we see in our area, which would be the aluminum tray usage pattern. So we'll show you kind of some notes from the label so you can see that. So this is again a thymol product. It is a fumigant, so this product is unlike the previous. This needs to be to fumigate in the hive. So that's why, again, you're not going to stick this in between brood frames or put it in a chamber, so to speak. This little tray comes as an aluminum. You can see the picture there. You may get one of these, and if I'm correct, the label for use may be fairly small on this because I think it's underneath that round circle paper on the top of the lid. So you might have to open it up and fold it out. Like you would on a pill bottle for humans, like Tylenol bottle or something you could fold up in the instructions. You're going to put that gel packet you can see on top of the brood, the box there. You can see that the gel itself should pretty much dissipate as it's working through, as it's fumigating. You do need to put some sort of spacer on the hive when you use this. All of this, again, is in the label, so it's very specific on what you want to use and the space, and also the temperature is really interesting for this product because it does have a temperature range that it's most effective. So obviously you can use it between 60 degrees and 105. So that's the external temperature, not inside the hive, obviously. So that's a fairly big range. So for us in the Northeast, this can be, maybe not so much now, but getting fairly close here when we get into late spring or early summer when we have a population increase. And then, of course, whenever we are going through the season and then into the fall, we have a population decrease. So if you use this in the summer and it is above that 105 degrees external temperature, or in any case for any of these products, if it's above or below the temperature threshold that's listed on the label, the products are not as effective. So you're wasting your time and your money applying them. That's why that's there. And again, this product you need to have gloves. You also need to have some sort of eyewear for this particular product, and you don't want to use it with honey supers. So this is not an effective product to use either for mite control and also because safety and health-wise, not for people to be able to consume honey. So this is a good one to use. We found that a lot of people, and I'll give you some tips in the end of all of these, sort of how we use them in the state apiaries in Massachusetts and how we think about them. So we'll move on to the next Time-All product. So that was ApiGuard. We're going to talk about ApiLifeVar. Little different formulation for this one, and I'll show you a few photos. So the label for this product is very short, only a couple of pages. Again, you'll notice a trend, right? They all start with the first aid section. Also, if you'll notice on this, I kind of put a little bit of if people have seen the detail, the EPA registration number is right underneath that warning, and you can see it really clearly. So hopefully people can see that and start identifying where it would be located. So if you go to the next slide, if you flip the pages of this label, it not only gives you some really great information. I'm doing it with you, by the way, so hopefully people can hear me probably flipping paper. It gave you some really great there we go. Gave you some really great information about treatment, personal protective equipment, and then on the third page you actually get into the treatment options. So this particular product comes in one formulation. It's this foam pieces that you'll need to break apart, almost like a chocolate bar. We go to the next slide. We'll show you sort of how to use this, how to put it on according to the label. Again, it is a Time-All product. It also has a couple of other essential oils in the product. I am from the South, so we tend to say oil. Oil, I think, is what everyone else in the world says. It has that in it, 3 of them. So Time-All, eucalyptus, and menthol. So both of these products with Time-All, the ApiGuard and the ApiLifeVar, are going to be fairly strong and have a real specific, if you think of like menthol, kind of that real specific odor to it. So you're going to smell these really quickly when you open up the package. Very similar to the previous product. It also is a fumigant, so you have to keep that in mind when you're applying it. This is interesting. So if you notice this photo right next to the name ApiLifeVar, it comes as this black kind of pad, if you want to call it that, or it looks literally like a chocolate, like a huge Willy Wonka chocolate bar. But it's made out of foam. It feels like the same material as the floral foam that you would use to make a floral arrangement. And it's going to have small perforations on it. So the first thing you want to do, it's going to be fairly long, and you want to break it in half, and you'll see those 2 halves that are broken up and lengthwise. And then once you do that, you'll have these 2 square sections that you can see are partitioned into additional 4 very small squares. At that point, you can now administer the product fairly easy, again, similar to the last product on top of the box itself. So a little bit different design with this product in the sense that you're going to not have this aluminum tray between you and the actual chemical, but you're going to be touching this. So again, very clear that you're going to need gloves for this. You're going to need some sort of eyewear, goggles, protection, and then you're also going to need a respirator for this particular product. You don't want to use this if you have honey supers. So again, very limited on, you're seeing a trend here probably, limited on what you can use with honey supers. Very similar to the last, you can use it during population increase or population decrease. So pretty much throughout the entire bee season, once the temperature is above 64, and as long as it's less than 95 degrees outside, and that you, again, do not put your honey supers on when using this product. You can use it several times throughout the season. So this is not one of those that you're limited on how many times you can use it, but it is one, if you're using this product, again, you want to make sure that you get your personal protective equipment on because you're going to be touching the actual chemicals as soon as you open up the package. So let's get out of the Time-All products and we're going to move right into formic acid. So we're going to keep going down our little chart here. I'm going through them with you. So again, sorry for the papers wrestling. So Miticide Quick Strips, really, really popular product. A lot of people have probably seen this. This is a formulation that's very similar, whether it's this formic acid product in Miticide Quick Strip or the formic acid in Formic Pro, which we'll talk about next. These labels are really unique in the sense that they're one of the few in the miticide world that have a lot of graphics. So it should fairly be easy to catch your eye, quick to look for the information. You'll notice again at the top, you can see on this particular screenshot, this is for 2 doses or 4 strips. So there's a couple different pages in this label. It's actually several pages long, but if you're trying to figure out which one to use, at the top of these, it tells you how many doses. Like the next page is 10 doses or 20 strips, and then it keeps going on and on. So it depends on what size box that you purchase. you go to the next slide, you can see for this particular product, when you open up the package, can we go, we'll go to the, there we go. So when you open up the package, they may come in a, it used to be a plastic container, but I think now they're in a cardboard box. So when you open that up, you're going to get what fairly looks similar to the last product, the Apelifar, except it's going to be the same kind of lengthwise patty design that you can see in Hannah's illustration. And again, these products, the formic acid is very pungent, so it has a real strong odor. So typically when people get these, as soon as you open it up, or even as soon as you open the box, you can usually smell this right away. So before you start working with these, again, just want to emphasize making sure you have your personal protective equipment on, even before you open up the packages. It is a fumigant, so similar to the other two products, it works by fumigating in the hive box. The treatment for these are fairly simple, I think a little easier maybe to remember than some of the other miticides, because this is either a 7-day or 21-day. So it depends on sort of what you feel more comfortable doing. Some people really like the 7 days on and take it off. You know, I did it this Friday, I'll take it off next Friday. And some people really like the 21 days and a much less formulation. So if you do the 7 days, you're going to use the 2 strips according to the label. If you do the 21 days, you're going to do 1 strip. So it all depends on, you know, sort of where your mite level is at. This product is, and the 2 formic acid products are one of the unique ones in our miticide group because they can be used with honey supers. So now you've got a tool finally in your toolkit that you can use when you have honey supers on your hives. We also, the label also recommends that when you use this product that you put on adequate ventilation. So you're going to need to add an additional box, whether it be a super or some sort of spacer, some way to add a little bit of additional ventilation to this hive when treated. The thing that I think we see the most issue as far as doing additional boxes is if you have say you have a 2-deep Langstroth hive setup and you have 1 honey super, right? You're in good business to apply this product according to the label because you've got an additional box that has ventilation. If you've got a 2-deep Langstroth hive and you have 4 or 5 honey supers, you've now pretty much exceeded the level of efficacy for this product. And now Jen's shaking her head. I see this a lot because it's one of the few products that you can use with honey supers. And I think people get a little desperate. They put it on and they forget, oh my goodness, this is a fumigant. So it's not going to work if this thing is a tower of a hive. It can't have 4, 5, or 6 boxes on it. It really is set up for that 2 deep or 2 brood box and 1 super, or 1 brood box and 1 super configuration. So just be really mindful if you're using this and you don't do a mite wash after treatment, you may not have good efficacy of this product. And your mite levels might be even higher than they were before treatment, which is something that we see. A couple other notes for this product, a couple of little alarms to keep in mind. This is a product that we tend to see issues with queens. So this product, when beekeepers use it, it can have some issues with queens, whether the queen fails or the queen dies. So just be really mindful when you use these products that you go and check the health of the hive, in addition to doing a mite wash after use. The good thing about this product, one more caveat before I forget. If you do use this product, the temperature range is really critical. And you'll notice it's a little lower than the previous product. So it's between 50 external temperature, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and 85 degrees Fahrenheit. So for folks who are in southern states or real hot areas of the country, if you're using this product, you want to be really careful because you may see bees immediately bearding on the outsides of the hive box, and you may have some real problems getting them to either re-enter the hive box or survive or thrive after this treatment. So be careful of the high heat with this product. Now, the good thing about this product, it's also one of the only mite products that, actually the only mite product that kills mites underneath the cappings, the wax cappings. So this is a really great tool for you to keep. I often recommend beekeepers, it should be kind of your surprise tool. Nothing else is working, or I'm trying to reduce the mite level and I'm having an issue. This is a great product to have as a back pocket sort of, a fail-safe if you're doing mite management, because it works really well underneath the cappings. It also works really well for honey supers, so you can sort of be able to use it a little bit. The other thing about this product is it's fairly well to use throughout the season. So we'll go to the next products. I'm thinking of when I talk to my beekeepers about this, some of the questions they have. So I've got a couple of little tips too, but we'll move through the next formic acid and then I'll give you a couple of those. So the next product that you'll see available is called Formic Pro. Very similar formulation. The packaging looks similar. The actual product itself looks really similar. The active ingredient is a little different as far as percentages, but otherwise still formic acid product. So the label also, you can see, right, looks also pretty similar. The use pattern is a little different. So if we go to the next slide, we'll show you on the label. This product is a little bit different as far as it's a 14-day use pattern or a 20-day use pattern. So again, similar packaging, similar the way the product's going to look when you open up the packaging. A similar active ingredient, also works the same mode of action as a fumigant. Very similar as far as ventilation. Also kills underneath the cappings. Also need to be careful for high heat, and it can cause harm to queens. So just think about these things when you're using it. This product, I think, is going to be the new standard for maybe this active ingredient. Jen, maybe I'm misspeaking on that. Sorry, I've got a phone ringing. That this may be, I don't know if myeloid quick strips is being phased out, but I think it might be. So, yeah. So if
I think it is. I think it is too. You just don't find it anywhere.
Yeah. So if you got the myeloid quick strips, obviously you can use them because they're still available as far as I think maybe purchased loosely, but this is going to be the new formic acid or the main formic acid active for this. Very similar temperature. It's pretty much the same in a lot of retrospects, just a little bit different for treatment time period, and obviously the same PPE you want to be mindful of whenever you purchase. When you purchase the mite treatment, you want to get that stuff too. So moving on, we're going to get out of these the formic acid products, and let's stay in for a minute the acid, and we're going to talk about oxalic. This is probably one of the most popular mite treatments that we see. It's also one of the, I think, by far the scariest mite treatment to apply because you need extra equipment, and if you're using the vaporization method of this mite treatment, you are heating up an acid that could catch something on fire. So I'm laughing because I see the most issues with this, and we've heard of beekeepers setting their hives on fire. So this is one that if you're going to use the different modes of action for this. So this treatment, this particular mite product is interesting in the sense that one of the few that is labeled for use with package bees. I should have put the back side of this. So the second page of this label is 2 pages. It will tell you the solution method. So it's going to tell you how to use it in a suspension, in a syringe, or dribble is what you may hear people say. The vaporization method, that's the heating, where you need a separate device to apply this product. So you're going to have to purchase some additional device that holds the crystals that you purchased, the actual oxalic acid crystals, heats them, and then dissipates that in the hive. Or you can use a spray mode of action application method for package bees. So if we go to the slide for this, kind of just real quick, you'll see these 3 different application methods that are on the label. This is an interesting product because it is a fumigant, but depending on, right, if you're using vaporization, it's a fumigant, but it's also contact if you're using it with a spray or if you're using it with a dribble. So if you basically suspend this in a liquid, whether it's a dribble, number 1 here, or number 2, that's going to be your contact. Whereas if you do vaporization, obviously it's going to turn into a vapor, so that's going to be your fumigant. So that doesn't mean that the label, by the way, is telling you to do all 3 of these. We'll talk a little bit about that too. It's just giving you options for the ways that you can apply this product. You'll see the product usually comes in a packaging as kind of a white crystal, not the consistency of sugar, but kind of similar. Yeah, I'm trying to describe them. Jen, maybe help me here. Maybe like white pop rocks, a little smaller than that. Anyways, but very different. So you're going to have to open up a package, and you're usually going to get some version of these crystals. Alternately, if you do purchase the APA bioxyl product, I believe it comes in a syringe in the dribble form already formulated. So it's already ready to go. You would just use it as a syringe right there. So you're going to also need a few things with this product. If you just purchase the crystals themselves, you're going to need, for the dribble, you're going to need a syringe unless your kit comes with one, because you're going to need to measure that out. You're obviously going to need something to physically measure the crystals with to get a weight so you can properly mix a solution. And then of course you're going to need something to mix a solution, some sort of sugar water mixture. And then you'll need a spray bottle if you do this with packages, so you physically will need a spray bottle. And then of course if you do the vaporization, you're going to need to purchase a vaporizer, which may be a piece of equipment that, again, your supplier would have if you purchase this mite treatment from them. This product by far it needs the most attention to the personal protective equipment. And of course, because you are heating something, you don't want to burn up your hive inadvertently or cause damage. You cannot apply this with honey supers. So the label states, and I see this probably the most common misapplication for this product is that people use it with honey supers. It's against the law to use oxalic acid with honey supers on. It's not according to the label. So do not do that. I'm sorry, I'm speaking to you slow like you're children. You're not at all, but I feel like I'm trying to get my cats trained at home. So I apologize. I've been home too long with cats. I feel like I'm my cat voice with you all of a sudden. But so sorry, put the catnip down. Okay. But do not use this with honey supers. It's not according to the label. It is also not temperature dependent. So this is a good one to have if you're worried about the vaporization. A lot of people get worried and they feel comfortable using that, especially if you're a new beekeeper. Then use the dribble. The dribble, I find, is a little easier method for people to understand how to use and mix up. You can use this product when there's a population decrease is when the label suggests. So that's going to be typically when you have low periods of brood. So that would be for us, like maybe really early spring, although most of us, if you have an overwintered hive, probably has some brood coming in, but it might be the lowest amount of brood through the season. You obviously wouldn't want to use it in the middle of summer because you would have a ton of brood, and then fall, you might see if you can time it if you've got a time period when there's a low amount of brood, but it might be really hard depending on your area if that happens in the fall. Alternately, you can use this product in the winter. So this is one that you could use during the winter when you would have low or no brood in the hive. So that's kind of the big caveat to this. It's great to use when there's not a lot of brood. And if we move through from oxalic acid, we're going to talk about one more acid for your intervention control. And this is HopGuard. What may have been to most folks and may still be registered, like for instance in Maine, is HopGuard 2. In Massachusetts, I was eager to learn. We just had it registered as HopGuard 3. So I guess there's a new formulation for this particular product, but it's a hop beta acids product. If you look at the label, again, very similar to the other labels. You can see the name, you can see the EPA registration number. You'll also see at the top of the label some first aid tips if something goes awry. If you go to the next page of the label, it's going to give you a little bit of information about personal protective equipment. And then on the third page, it'll give you some specific information. And I'm going to show you this diagram in a couple later slides. So we'll wait for now, but you can see on there, they actually show you frames of brood, how to put this on. So if we go to the next slide. Oh, there we go. Okay. So it is a contact mode of action. So this product needs to come in contact with the bees. This product is interesting when you pull it out of the packaging. Again, want to make sure you have your gloves on and your goggles. It can be a little sticky. So be prepared before you open up the packaging. Already have your gloves ready again. Just good always to have that before you open up a pesticide package. The label instructions are fairly easy to read and understand as far as how many to use, how long. It's not a good product to use when you have a lot of brood in the hive. So something that you want to use right before the population is increased and then right as the population is decreasing. So if you can time it with the lowest amount of brood, right before the increase and right before the decrease, right after the decrease, you'd be perfect. It can be used with honey supers. So this is another one of the only other products besides formic acid that you can use with honey supers on the hive. It's also unique because it's not temperature dependent. So you can use this fairly consistently throughout the season, regardless of temperature. It is one of the only other products that's registered for use in packaged bees. So the new label has specific information for packaged bees if you wanted to use that before you, or as you're installing your packaged bees. So you go through the next product. I think we're done with the chemical part, but what I wanted to at least show you for all the products, a breakdown on temperature. So if we look at this a couple of different ways, so the intervention or chemical tools that you have, if you break them down by temperature, for things that are at the outside temperature of your hive is less than 50 degrees, equal to or less than 50 degrees, there should be a line there. You can use oxalic acid or apobioxol if that's registered, HopGuard 3 and Apivar. So all of those are temperature, pretty much either temperature independent. There's no stigma or label on that. If it's greater than 50 degrees, it needs to be greater or equal to 50 degrees for you to use also the rest of these products. Or there's, again, no temperature restriction. So you see oxalic acid and Apivar and HopGuard 3 down there as well because they don't have any stipulation. So you need to be mindful of temperature when you're thinking about IPM tools because this will really help you in the bigger grand plan, especially even, we're telling you not to treat by a season. So we're not saying you should treat by temperature, but obviously temperature is going to happen regardless. So if for instance, right now, today we've got beautiful sunny weather outside, but it's only about 50 degrees. So it's probably not a great day for me to apply, Apiguard, because it's obviously not something that's temperature-wise fits into the mold. For a variety of other reasons, not a good treatment for right now, but that's a good way for you to sort of take home. If you go to the next slide, I think Hannah did a great job of recategorizing these with the honey supers. So we get this question a lot. The only thing that you can apply again with honey supers are HopGuard products, so 2 or 3, and then the formic acid, so Mitaway Quick Strip or Formic Pro. And again, just one last real caveat for the formic acid products. They're the only ones listed that fumigate to kill mites underneath that wax capping. So you want to save these as a really special tool in your toolkit to use, especially if you've got a hive that has a lot of brood and nothing else that fits during a high brood time period is working. So let's go down. I think we're going to give you a couple other questions to think about, and then I know we have a little bit of time here. One of the things that I think we hear about the most are alternative mite treatments, and Jen is probably very familiar with this, whether we'll go to the next slide, all kind of things. And people, I don't want to damper anyone's creativity. The only reason we have the mite treatments we have now is because folks tried stuff, I'm sure, in addition to obviously research and things like that being done to them on a large scale. But some of these things really do come from the result of people thinking outside of the box and figuring out this could be an interesting thing to try in your hive. I just want to discourage you with that positive note. I just want to bring it down to reality that off-label use of any pesticides, specifically wood bleach, is against the law. However, if you're using rhubarb leaves, thyme plants, mineral oil, powdered sugar, those are not effective mite treatments. So they're probably not going to be very effective in your hive. I'm not saying that you are not going to get any mite control from them, but I don't think it's going to be the level that you're probably going for. And it's also going to cause more damage. So we do have a lot of people that ask questions about this because obviously thyme is in 2 of the mite products that are available for use, and they think, okay, if I plant thyme plants near my hive, my bees may visit them, right, and we might get some mite control. Or if I take thyme plants that I've grown in my garden, cut them, and stick them inside of the hive, we could get mite control. Yeah, neither one of those things are we found to be very effective. So, but I want to champion your way of thinking. I think that's the only way we're going to continue to advance in Varroa mite treatments. I actually had a phone call with USDA this morning on this specific topic, and they were really, really open to, really helping beekeepers to fast track the registration of mite products because they recognize what a monumental crisis this is in plaguing bee populations. So I think you've got big cheerleaders working to try to get additional products registered. I just don't think we're there yet. And these things are not registrable products. The other thing is, Jen, you want to say anything else about off-label pesticide use? Because this is something I think we see a lot of.
Yeah, my only comment. Oh, I'm getting some weird feedback. So my only comment is that I have seen people actually kill their hives using these off-label treatments. So especially when you're mixing stuff up and spraying it, fogging it into a hive, you never know the unintended consequences of those things. So just be very careful. Actually, just don't use anything that's off-label.
Yeah. So, okay, we got to bring it back positive again. We can't end on a negative note. Okay, so the other thing I want to recognize, there's a lot of folks doing different types of hives, so non-traditional or non-link straw hive types, whether it be a horizontal hive or a top bar hive, or maybe you've made your own version of a hive in some way, or maybe you're using hollowed out trees. There's a lot of things available. So I think the things to keep in mind with this question, if you go to the next slide, we'll go through a couple of these and give you some tips. So, for instance, a lot of folks may be using an 8-frame link straw hive. So, and these miticides and mite labels are traditionally set up to read or imply, I'm assuming in some of these, that it's for a 10-frame link straw hive. So, the key words again to look for are frames of brood or frames of bees, so FOB, And that gives you an idea, if obviously if you're running a Langstroth hive and you have 2 frames of bees or 2 frames of brood, you can adjust your mite treatment on the label if the language is specified for how many strips or how many, pieces per frame of bees or frames of brood. So that's language to look for. So don't feel shut out or that you don't have any options if you have some different types of hives. But likewise, if you go to the next slide, if you're running or if you're managing a top bar hive, so maybe you have frames that are a little harder, to stick these mite treatments in between or to apply in some way in the hive. Maybe, for instance, your hive, the inner cover or your cover doesn't have a space that you can put in, if you need an additional space, or you don't have a super, for instance, if you're using MyBlade quick strips to put on to increase ventilation. So there are things that you can do for sure. And if you're thinking about this now, or if you're managing alternative types of hives, first, of course, I apologize because, again, the labels are a little hard to understand and interpret for these different hives. And then also, you may need to do a little work around creating or building some things to put into these hives to make up for that deficit. So maybe you need to create some sort of little spacer if you're running a top bar hive, or maybe you need to create, additional box or something that you can put on top. We go through, I think the next slide was maybe one more for the packages. We talked a little bit about packages. So the other thing is to be mindful of, if you're just getting your bees for the season, or if you're planning to, or if you're in the works, or if you've already just installed them. We've had our first packages in Massachusetts a couple weeks ago. So it's that time of year. You are not without options. So again, you can use HopGuard 3. You can also use oxalic acid. There are treatments available to you. Also, it is a time for you as a bee purchaser to ask and get some good information from your supplier around what mite treatments may have already been used. So we mentioned in earlier webinars that some states that supply packaged bees require in state law that the packages are treated, in the sense the bees that the packages are shook from are treated before shaking. So there may have been mite treatments already put on your bees, and you need to be aware of that. Alternately, if you purchase a nuke and there are mite treatments in the box, definitely, again, ask the supplier, hey, what are these things in my box? I don't know what this is. They should be giving you some information around what that is, especially if they've left something in the nuke box, for you. Because if, learning and watching this webinar, right, you need personal protective equipment before you handle these. So if it's something inside the nuke box and you're going to take the frames out and put them in your hive, you may come in contact with that. So therefore, you would need to know what they are. So just ask that simple question when you go to pick up your bees. Have you applied any mite treatments, or do you know if any mite treatments have been applied to these bees? And that'll really help you start thinking about this before the season starts. I think we there. Oh, here we go. Oh yeah, so just to give you again an example, this is that picture from HopGuard. You can see they one of the little charts that really easy to understand. So they list it as frames of bees, and they tell you, per frames of bees that you have, how many of these HopGuard strips that you could put in to your hive for treatment. And they give you a little bit more data in here, which is really some primers, around, time the treatments to 2 weeks apart and things like that. So these treatments, or the labels don't usually have a ton of language. There's not a lot of reading here. It's just enough where you need to get the information, and hopefully you read the additional questions and, of course, all the other pieces that we pointed out earlier. So this should not be a big investment of your time to read these labels, and because it is, again, the law, it's also your responsibility to be a good bee steward. I know Jen hates my little bee puns. Also a good beekeeper, and just a good human to make sure you apply these things correctly, and of course, within the bounds of the law, so you're not being unlawful. All right, I think we get close to the end. Yana has been.
I'm just going to acknowledge that we're like 10 minutes over time, and but there's a little bit left for us to cover and some wrap up, so we'll do that. And we have loads of great questions, and we don't have a lot of time to answer them this afternoon, so we will get them answered. We'll do them probably in writing. We may do another Q&A session, but I just want to acknowledge, thank you for the people that have put in their questions. And I didn't want to interrupt Kim because there was lots of great information. So it was, but let's finish up the part, what we have for you today, and hopefully we'll have time for a couple of questions right at the end. But thank you for staying with us. All right.
Okay, so just a real quick, sorry y'all, I know we get to talking. Jen and I could talk as well. Obviously, this has been like 6 hours we've been talking to y'all just about mites. Imagine if we started talking to you about bees, we'd never get off. Okay. So I get this question actually a lot. You know, hey, we just introduced me to all these mite products. You're telling me that I can use them at certain times of year, temperatures, brood, different modes of action. Can I just put a whole bunch in at one time? No, do not do that. It is not safe for you, and it's also not safe for the bee. So when you think about time and mite products and the application of them, we're going to do really, hopefully, a better in-depth conversation with that in the next webinar. Now that you've understood mite biology, you've understood what IPM is, you now understand what tools are available to you, and creating an IPM plan, we're going to help you break that down in the next webinar so you can make your own plan. So, but definitely don't do this in the meantime.
Great. Okay, so future webinars and workshops. We've got a workshop coming up 2 weeks from today on Monday, April 20th. From 1 until 2:30 on Varroa Mite IPM and creating your own IPM plan. If you haven't watched the other webinars, it might be useful to go back and watch those so that you could come into that last session having seen the content to date. So it would probably really help you with creating your plan. And I will let Kim or Jen address the next ones.
Well, I promised Hannah at UMass that I would plug these again. So actually, I really appreciate everybody that showed interest. We filled up this workshop and have a waiting list big enough to have a whole nother workshop. So really keep your request for this coming. Yana, actually, if you can scroll down one slide, I think they can get the information. Oh my gosh, yeah, maybe a couple, sorry. So yeah, so if you go to the umass.edu pollinators, or if you Google this, Hannah's fantastic. She'll put you on the waiting list. Unfortunately, this workshop has been canceled. Like a lot of things in our lives, we're not really certain when we can get back up and running. But when we do, know that we know you're there. If you do express interest, we'll definitely keep you on the list. And we're going to offer a couple of these because it seems like they're really of interest. So please don't discourage you from visiting the website and sending Hannah an email. So thank you for the plug.
And we have a beekeeping conference coming up in Maine in 2020, the first week of August. I'm not sure if this is going to be happening. Depends on how things play out over the next month or so. But come and check us out. We'll be talking a lot about mites and looking at treatments and all kinds of research and hands-on experience for beekeepers.
All right, and we have a couple of questions for you based on the poll that we had in the beginning. So in the moment, you should see a poll. There we go. So if you can just take a moment to answer these questions at the end of the webinar, that would be wonderful, and we'll share the results with you. And same as at the beginning, there are no right and wrong answers. Just take your best guess. It's not a test, and I'll give you a moment to do that. Great. Okay, wonderful. Thank you for everyone that's taken the time to do that. So I'm just going to share the poll with you. As you can see, the majority of people consider themselves to be moderately knowledgeable, and then there's a lot more people in the very knowledgeable. So it sounds like it's been a really useful webinar for people from that. And as a result of this webinar, most people are planning on considering using mite away strips, oxalic acid and HopGuard 3, and actually in quite a few also for doing non-chemical options. And how likely are you to increase your use of IPM? Very likely and extremely likely are the two largest answers, which I'm sure makes Kim and Jen very happy. And 60% of the people already use an IPM plan. And the main reasons for not using an IPM plan, not knowing how to make one. So for those 24% of people who don't know how to make a plan, turn up 2 weeks from today, same time, and we can definitely help you with that. So terrific. All right, I'm just going to finish up just a few little slides that we have here. We have a place on our website where you can find colleagues to work with. So if there's an area, presumably beekeeping for most of the folks here, if you're interested in collaborating with a researcher, please feel free to put a notice up here of who you are and what you're interested in. It's a really good way for us to increase collaboration across the Northeast, and which is one of our major goals at the Northeastern IPM Center. The recording of today's webinar is going to be up in about a week. You'll receive an email from me with a link, and you can watch it as many times as you like, and feel free to share it. We're happy for it to be shared around. This webinar has been funded by NIFA and through the Northeastern IPM Center, and the two employers for Jen and Kim. And without their funding, this would not happen. So we're deeply appreciative. And here's contact information for Jen and Kim. So it is 2:49. We're 20 minutes over, and but let's just take 2 or 3 really short last questions, and we will also make a really good attempt to answer all your questions by the end of this series. But I see there's a couple here that have been flagged. How do you dispose of leftover packages or materials?
I'm assuming this is like the boxes, like the package screen and the wood. Sorry.
No, I think the packaging of the pesticide packaging. Or the treatments.
Oh, sorry. No, sorry. I was looking at another question. Oh, that's a great question. We actually, on a couple of the labels, there have specific language about disposal on the label. Alternately, I always recommend, especially if you're using gloves that can be disposed of, depending on what type of gloves you purchase. And I realize now that, we've done a disservice here to the PPE world, because I think it really would be bode if for you to see and touch, and you could see the PPE that we've had suggested by our pesticide extension coordinator. But typically it's listed to wrap all the materials in a trash bag that's sealed and secure, and then dispose of it all together. So obviously you never want to leave wrappers and packaging out in the apiary so that animals or humans can come in contact with it. But that's a great question.
Great, lovely, thank you. And then another question is, when you're talking temperature range, is it night temperature or day temperature?
Well, that's a good question. Usually the day temperature, so not usually, but typically this the day temperature, so the daytime. I know that there are some parts of, we may have a huge extremes at nighttime, and that might affect the product efficacy here, but for the most part, it's daytime temperature usually. And I don't know, Jen, maybe there are parts of Maine that probably get some pretty big swings in temperature, but I imagine if you're 60 degrees during the day, you're probably fairly close to that at night. I don't know.
You're still above freezing.
Okay. All right, so Danielle asked, if my gloves aren't thick enough, can they be doubled?
This is a question that we had a good conversation with Natalia during the workshops about this, because beekeepers obviously expressed concern, even then, trying to figure out what gloves to purchase. And serendipitously, Hannah and I purchased gloves off of Amazon, and they were the wrong gloves. So we got told and handed to ourselves in that workshop by Natalia, which was awesome. So I think it's really easy to purchase the wrong protective equipment. Natalia made a really great half sheet for our beekeepers during the workshop, and I can reach out and find out if that's something that we can be made available. But it was really awesome because it showed all the different types of protective equipment that you can purchase. And the gloves, one second. Yeah.
Well, that would be a really wonderful thing to share.
Yeah, I can ask and see if she's comfortable with sharing that, but I lost it here. Sorry, everybody. Too many
Yeah, oh, there it is.
Here we go. Okay. Yeah. So, so chemical resistant gloves usually are made from nitrile PVC, neoprene, Viton, and butyl rubber. Do not use gloves made of latex, cotton, or leather. All of those surfaces are porous. And even some of the gloves you find on Amazon may be hard to figure out what they're made of. So just be really careful. And I would suggest to reach out to a better website or a better supplier if you're using. But for sure, if you're using your leather beekeeping gloves, those are not personal protective equipment for applying pesticides.
Great. Okay, thank you. And we'll take one last question from Lynn. If you're treating one hive in your apiary for hive Varroa counts, should you treat all of your hives at the same time, regardless of the mite count in those hives?
Yeah, so it depends. If you've sampled all the hives, and if you have 3 hives one of them tests high and the other two test low, just treat the one. But if you are doing a subset, if you have 10 hives and you only sample 1 or 2 or 3 of them and you get a high roll, I usually suggest to treat everything.
Great. All right, wonderful. Well, I wish we could answer all of these questions that are here, but we don't have time today. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. I hope it was incredibly helpful for you, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks and helping you with your plan and answering questions as well. So thanks very much. And thank you to Jen and Kim for all of your expertise and your education and the fact that you have a house that has internet service at this time. A very useful thing. So, okay. All right. That's the end of our session for today. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.